Welcome to Happy Path Programming. I'm Bruce Eckel.
I'm James Ward.
So let's see, what should we start with? You want to start with conferences?
Let's start with conferences.
Okay, because it's basically a week before the STFU starts here in Crested
the
Butte.
Summer Tech Forum Unconference.
Right, and it's going to be small, but I regularly have learning experiences where I realize, bigger isn't always better.
Yeah.
And you have a different experience with a smaller group of people, but it's still very good.
Yeah.
So it doesn't, but there's a little voice in me that says, well, successful means larger, but no.
Yeah.
We'll have an awesome time.
What does success mean?
Oh man. Yeah.
For a conference.
Or just in general, what have we been programmed to believe?
There's that, but then it's like, what do we value out of this?
Right. What needs are fulfilled.
Yeah.
And I think what we have learned over many years is that the actual need is not the technical knowledge, although we get plenty of that. It's the connection. So.
Yeah. Well, and that's a lot of what people go to conferences for, is the connection.
But they don't know that.
Right. It's not, we don't have awareness of that need when we go to a conference.
No, we think
we're there to learn,
material.
but really what people always remember and remark on is the connections that they made.
Right. And not the business. No, we're not talking connections and like business connections and handing out your cards.
Right, that might be part of it, but
it is. But that's
more
not
importantly is the human.
Yes, exactly.
The human connection. It's
meeting
people like you, telling your war stories, and
just being able to talk about things and have them actually understand it.
Yeah.
That especially as we get more rarefied.
Yeah.
In our knowledge. It becomes harder and harder to have a discussion with somebody who actually have that discussion.
Yeah. Well, and I think one thing that we've seen come out of the last year and a half is that we really, as humans, generally need that connection. And we probably used conferences, some of us, as a way to get that, maybe user groups or going into an office and, seeing people or whatever. And so I think there was, at the beginning of this, there was some assumption that we would never really go back to in-person conferences, or, that remote work would just be the standard. And I think there will be some of that, but I think that we discovered that we weren't, through that, we were not receiving the connection that we needed with other people. And it was interesting. I saw this most evidently when I'm on Twitter a lot, and I feel like there's a decent level of connection that I maintain with people through Twitter, and some of it is kind of a facade of connection, but what showed me the need for connection more visibly during COVID stuff was when Clubhouse came out, and all of a sudden it was all the rage. And what it showed me was that just like text-based Twitter was kind of not fulfilling the need for connection sufficiently, and people wanted to hear each other's voices, and that's why Clubhouse took off so quickly. It's like, oh, isn't it nice to like have a conversation and hear your voice and not just do it through text.
So I wonder, it feels like they invented Clubhouse before the pandemic, right? They were working on it. They had that idea.
Yeah.
So
it just really blew up, a year ago or whatever, as I think people were really feeling this need deeply.
Yep. But at first, for the longest time, I didn't understand that what these conferences that we do up here were about that. I really thought, we're educating people. We're educating people. And I had this long history because I was the chair of C++ and Java tracks at the Software Development Conference. And that was a lot of, organization of people presenting things and all that. And then when the Borland Conference came along, they had the software development conference had a whole staff of people. This is a big thing. Then they made their money off of trade show floor
Okay.
space,
Yeah. The exhibitors.
exhibitor space. And so when the internet came along, and I said, people, this is a really expensive. It's not just what you charge. They're taking developers and they're putting them in the booth, and that's really expensive for them. They're going to not want to do this anymore, and they have the internet. They're not handing out discs for you to try their product anymore. And they kind of got that, the conference, but they said the next words out of their mouth was, that's where we make all of our money. And I thought, okay, this conference is doomed because they can't let go of that. They have to let go of that, whatever it costs. So they didn't let go of it, and they went out of business. But the Borland conference had one person and a server, and that's how they organized the conference. That's how they got all of the talks, and that's how people signed up. And I thought, oh, this changes everything. How can we even do this more? This sort of low overhead creation of conferences. And I was walking around at numerous conferences, I suppose, talking to people about this. And finally, I mentioned it to Martin Fowler, who I'd known for years from other things. And Martin said, well, let's try an experiment.
Yeah.
And we ended up trying numerous experiments up here in Crested Butte. And we tried a bunch of things, and it's interesting. I don't know. I guess everything makes me think of functional programming these days, because that book.
Oh, I'd love to hear you say that.
Keeps
well,
it keeps messing with other things in my head, and just realizing, we didn't know what problem we were solving, because initially we said, okay, well, everybody will be in the same room, of course, because it was a small group. It was, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 people at the most. So we'll put everybody in the same group at a big table, and then we'll initially we had everybody come up with topics that they wanted to talk about, because we wanted this to be an unstructured kind of spontaneous thing. And then we used a technique called dot voting, where you had, 10 dots. You could put them all on one thing if you wanted. You could distribute them. And then we would order our list by the number of dots that each thing got. And then we would have this conversation in a single room. And now, of course, I see the problem is that you didn't have any freedom. And if somebody wanted to use up all the airspace,
there wasn't a mechanism to.
There was no other place to go. It's like you were either here or you were not participating at all. And that was in hindsight. But initially it was like, well, how do we communicate to the person who's talking too much?
Feeling the tension of being stuck, but not being able to do anything about it.
Right. And then Martin.
So you're iterating, and this was 20 years ago or something that you started experimenting with this?
Yes. And because you came to, maybe
it's 15 years ago, I started coming up to the architecture summit.
Yes, that was it. Yeah, because this was, I think that was initially what we called it, the software architecture summit or something like that. Or we had some name for it. And all these, people who were invited were often authors and speakers. And so they were, they were used to rolling, once they got onto something, they could just keep talking and talking.
Yeah.
And so, the whole, how do you have a conversation when everybody's used to doing public speaking?
Yeah.
Ooh, that's a little hard.
Well, and you didn't, I think at the beginning, you didn't realize that, like you said, what did you need? And the need was for not to be talked to, but to participate in a conversation so that you could connect. But it took you many years to
we didn't need. Because it's naturally, it's like inheritance polymorphism. Naturally, everybody's got to be in the same room. Everything's got to be the same base type. And it's not questioning that.
Yeah.
And so at one point I came up with these little cardboard triangles with colors on them. And there was green, which is I like what you're saying. Keep going. There was yellow. I'm starting to get tired of this. And then there was red, which is please stop now.
Yeah.
Those did not work. People didn't want to use them.
Yeah. Feels offensive.
It does. Well, and also it's like, well, I mean, I don't want to hear this anymore, but I don't know about everybody else, et cetera. It didn't give you the right choice. But then Martin came across the open spaces.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, okay.
There's a structure.
There is a structure, but it's way less restrictive than this. And one of the important things is you have more than one conversation going on. And if you don't want to listen to this one for whatever reason, doesn't matter. I mean, maybe there's somebody in there who's talking too much. Or you're not interested in this conversation, whatever. You have a choice. You can go to another one. You can find somebody else who's not interested in anything and go get coffee. You can take a nap. You can do whatever you want.
So before we get into the law of 2 feet, I just want to mention that there is another name for this structure that is called lean coffee. And that's become kind of the more modern, I think, terminology for the structure, but it's essentially the same. So if you've heard the term lean coffee, we're basically talking about
and also unconferences.
Unconferences. I think unconferences didn't generally have the same structure. They had the same disstructure, but not necessarily the same structure. So I do want to hear about obviously I've been to many of these, so I know about the structure of.
You were part of the evolution of the
spaces, but tell us about the law of 2 feet.
So the law of 2 feet is, and this is even challenging to people because, if somebody's talking and you get up and leave, you're worried about sending a message. They're going to think I'm bored or whatever. So it's still hard to get people over that. But generally, I feel like I see it happen. I try and model behavior. It just means, hey, if it isn't working for you, I usually add that, okay, look, if you're in the room and you're bored, you're actually bringing the energy down. And I just read an article where they were saying, there seems to be something about people being in the same room that, we haven't figured it out, but there seems to be like some sort of
mystical energy.
I was hesitating on using the word
pheromones,
mystical connection, but they talk about mirror neurons and things like that. It seems like there's some kind of connection going on that we haven't put our finger on, but we can see evidence for. And so it's like, okay, so if I'm in this room and I'm bored, and
you're affecting that energy.
I'm affecting that energy, and even if I'm just looking bored, even if it's like
very subtle
cues
that you can't hide.
So you're actually, I say this to encourage people to get up and leave,
use the law of 2 feet.
Say, look, you're actually kind of damaging the energy in that room, so you're helping. So really do feel totally justified in going and finding something.
It took me many years to feel comfortable with it, and I still have some strategies that I use so that I feel okay with leaving. One of those is I'll look at my phone, oh my gosh, something important is happening, and make it obvious that it's not about you. I just have to go deal with this.
You're doing theater.
That's right.
You're like, but you have to do it to go, okay, I'm sending the message, okay, so I'm being polite and everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
and just so that I feel better about myself.
Right.
Yeah. It definitely was hard to embrace the law of 2 feet, but it's it is foundational to the structure because it creates this corrective mechanism where if somebody is talking too much, in the ideal scenario, if everyone else doesn't want to hear them anymore, then they all get up and leave. And so I think it does that, but then it allows this fluidness where it's like, I'm not feeling it in this session. Let me go try this one and see if I'm going to connect with that one. And so it for me, it's totally changed my mindset on how a space can be used, or really it requires multiple spaces, but how multiple spaces can be used to facilitate everyone getting what they need in this connection and education place
as much as possible, of course.
That's
I mean, there's always there's always, but I mean, that's what we're trying to do, which is this NVC workshop that I take. Um, the leader is regularly talking about um, at least acknowledging all needs. You might not be able to meet all needs. If somebody says, well, I have to have everybody listen to me for an hour, then we might not be able to meet that need. But at least we can say, oh, okay, it sounds like, you would like to have everybody, and let's, maybe we can create a space for that, for people who want to listen to you give a presentation. We'll create that space and see who shows up.
Yeah.
And that's okay. It's like, but no guarantees. We're not going to force people to, which is basically the structure of eyes forward presentations, especially if there's nothing else going on.
Right. Yeah.
Like when Luciano and I went to the Go conference, I was one of the early ones. It was like, well, there was nothing else happening. He tweeted.
You could only go to an eyes forward session.
And they had, and there were some that were like full, so you couldn't go to those. And so what he did is he tweeted that he was having his own little open spaces session.
Nice.
And he sat at a table and put a card up or something, and people came and they had a discussion. So because he had come to some of these. So anyway, this is Luciano Ramallo, who's the writer
author of Python something.
The really super good Python book.
And
he's just finishing his second edition.
So we've got Law of 2 Feet, which is a critical piece in the conferences that you do up here. And will be the structure for the conference, the Summer Tech Forum, STFU, Summer Tech Forum Unconference.
Yes.
And there's a few other elements that I wanted to talk through with this that are interesting. There's the idea board, or I don't know if there's a name for that, how we create the session ideas, but maybe tell us a little
bit about. I call it? That's the grid or whatever it is. The grid. Yeah, because it's got the rooms and it has the times, and it's a big sheet of paper, and then you have Post-it notes. And if you have a topic that you're interested in talking about, you don't have to be an expert. You don't have to. It just has to be something you're interested in, and you put the title of the discussion
session,
the session. Thank you. Title of the session, and then you put your name on it, and that's not because you own it or anything. It's just because you.
Sometimes some grid organization needs to happen.
Right.
Can we move this one here?
Right.
Can we combine these?
Or maybe this is 2 topics or something like that. So some adjustment can happen. Does regularly happen. So it's a fluid grid of things going on.
Right.
So it allows. One of the great things is that it allows, if you have a session and you go, oh, we've just thought of a new thing, and then you create a new session. Based on that.
So we the grid is generally open for the whole week. Usually things fill up more kind of at the beginning, and then as we progress through, they fill up the later slots, as well as people have other ideas or conversations spur things. And there is all that rearranging. But then I wanted to come back to the dot voting, because we've sometimes used dot voting, sometimes not. And we primarily use it as capacity planning. It's like, okay, this room fits 10 people, this room fits 40 people, and the dots allow us to adjust. It's
kind of an RSVP.
Yeah. Allow us to adjust the where different things go. But we haven't always used it, and things seem to work without it. It's like, I don't know.
Yeah, the ability to allocate rooms to sessions is the most important thing, and the rest of it is kind of like, oh yeah,
it figures itself out.
And even when it's like we discover, oh, we put this in the small room, but there's a whole ton of people, let's spontaneously move it to a bigger room.
Yeah, or do it a second time.
That's true. That's true. And we've also,
I think we've also been able to do implicit capacity planning, because we're the people that are doing the board, or well, everyone's doing the board organization, but everyone's pretty aware of like what's going to be a popular session. There are some surprises, but
Mhm.
generally it's like, all right, any session that Barry is put his name on is going to be amazing, and everyone's going to want to be there because Barry is amazing, and he
Barry
just is.
always says, he says the interesting little bone mows.
Yeah, but he's just, I don't know, for some reason his sessions are always like what everyone wants to talk about.
Uh-huh. It's yeah, it's hard not to think that if Barry Hawkins is holding a session, that's going to be interesting
Yeah.
for whatever reason.
Yeah. So we've I think on and off tried the dot voting, but we haven't necessarily needed it in most scenarios.
Right. Yeah, that's one of the things that I've been kind of hunting for. Again, it makes me think of functional programming because it's like, well, what is the fundamental algebra that you have to make this thing work? And then what else is just implementation details that there's like, yeah, dot voting can be helpful, but it's not essential. What's essential is you to be able to look before a session and go, what do I want to talk? What do I want to go see?
Yeah.
That's the structure that you need, and without, then it's just chaos.
Yeah.
And I've seen other things like that too, where often we end up focusing on the wrong thing, like having everybody in the same room. And when what the really essential thing is about all of this is creating connections, creating discussions, and so when we go on a hike,
Yeah.
or some other event, we end up having these really interesting discussions because for some reason there are people who go, oh, we're just going on a hike, now I can talk about this thing that I would be too uncomfortable talking about, like in an official capacity.
Right.
It's like, oh, so we need something to support that.
Yeah.
Or one of the things that we discovered, I'm sure Bill came up with this idea when we had this. We've had this session twice where women talk about their experiences in technology, and there's an extra constraint on that, which is men can only ask questions. And it's like all of a sudden that changes the whole shape of the interaction.
Yeah.
And it's really important.
Yeah.
And
constraints can be really freeing.
Absolutely. I mean, and then of course it's the right constraint. It's like, well, what do you need? What's the what are the two things that you need to define a monad? You need a unit and a flat map, and everything else can be derived from that. So those essential things are, it's like, how do you find those?
Yeah, and in the case of that wonderful session where the men can only ask questions, maybe one of the essential things is there can be no mansplaining or men trying to fix problems, and because the goal is connection. And
yes, and what's the barrier to connection? Well,
men.
Well, right. So we need to put the constraint on them.
That's right.
Especially when we're having this session. But the things that are able to be brought out in that situation are amazing.
Yeah.
And I think it's because of that constraint.
Yeah. So we've got the structure with law of 2 feet and the grid. And then talk just for a moment more about the balance of time in the week of the conferences you do across like the session grid time and the extracurricular time.
Oh, right. So we usually, well, I mean, there's a couple of things about that I learned over time. Initially, it was like, oh, people aren't finishing sessions, and then they want to go get coffee, and it's just taking too long. We got to control these people somehow. And then then it was, oh, maybe we should just shorten the session and allow more break time. And it's like, yep, that was the solution. Don't try. So whenever you find yourself thinking, how do we make people do something, just in general, stop and take a pause.
It's kind of a good summary of your journey with conferences, is learning to let go and not try to control people.
We're trying to serve them. We're not to, but, well, and then, historically, conferences have been very patriarchal.
Yeah.
So it's not surprising that I took a while to take apart those.
Well, and that was typical conference thing was here's what we're going to make you do.
Well, right, and it came from the education system.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just basically different kind of education, right? So
right.
we use that, and they say, here's your curriculum, here's what you have to do, and here's this. Here's where you got to start, and here's how fast you have to move. All of the things are controlled, and we're trying to remove all of those. We're trying to say, hey, if this is going too fast for you, ask a question. There's probably a bunch of other people in the room who have that same question. It's going too fast for them. Slow down. Going fast isn't going to help you learn anything.
Yeah. So a typical day, run us through a typical day at the conference.
Well, the main days in the summertime, because in the afternoon we often have the kind of monsoon storms. So in the summertime, we have outdoor activities in the morning when it's typically clear. And those are usually like little hikes. Some people may want to go on mountain bike rides, or I don't know, go swim in a lake or something like that. It's pretty spontaneous, but we usually like tell people, here's what's going on. Actually,
or people get together and work on projects.
People get together and work on projects. Often, well, we use Slack a lot, and so like if somebody wants to go to breakfast or whatever, they'll announce on Slack, well, I'm going to try and go to this place for breakfast. Try, I say, because we have less places available now.
Yeah. Difficult.
Or I'm going to do this for breakfast, or we're going to have breakfast at Bruce's house or something like that. And then people see that and they go, oh, that sounds good. I'll do that. And then
people organize themselves into morning activities.
Yes, the self-organization part is, I think, what really fascinates me about this whole thing. And with the co-working space, I've tried to figure out how to make that self-organizing, and so far have kind of, I mean, it works, but it doesn't feel like what I was unclearly hoping for that. So that has more work to do. And so, yes, there's always this ability, and it gets better and better as the week goes on, of somebody going, hey, I'm interested in this and I want to explore it. Is anyone else interested?
Mm-hmm.
And there usually is.
Yeah.
And but then in the afternoon we do have times when we start the sessions, and
I think we usually start it in the summertime 1:30,
something like that.
We do an hour block for a session.
50 minutes. We reduced it so that we could have the half-hour break.
Okay, and a 30-minute break. So we usually do 3 different session blocks.
Yeah, something like that. I think the first day I'm explaining how this works. So,
and then self-organize for dinner stuff, and then usually 2 of the nights we do lightning talks, and people sign up for those, and that's people's 5 minutes to get in front of people and present.
Right, and that can be anything. That can be like one of the most memorable ones that that still sticks in my head is this guy who was talking about cave diving, and he was showing his pictures, and nothing to do with technology.
Wow, I think I missed that one.
I think you might have, because it was pretty. It's like, wow. I mean, and we all had questions. It's like, well, how do you make sure you don't die? Cave diving.
All the memorable ones are non-technical, surprisingly.
Often.
Like Joel Neely's thing on fonts was fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Joe Nuxall's one on car racing.
Right.
Traction stuff.
And you're thinking, how's the car shifting its weight and putting pressure on the wheels and all that kind of stuff. Oh, yeah. There was a ton of things.
Ones. Okay, now talk about so that's kind of the structure of a normal day. Talk about the hack day.
So the hack day originally was because we were doing this in the winter, and we had a number of situations where we hadn't really figured out how to get people up here reliably, and there would almost always be some storm, and so people couldn't fly into Gunnison. And now we recommend flying to Denver, carpool, up to Crested Butte, or there's a bus that has, this chain system, and they always, unless the road is physically blocked off,
which does
they will
happen,
go
but
through, which does happen sometimes. So anyway, Dick Wall came up with the idea of having, how about if Monday was a hack day? And then, if you made it, great. If you didn't make
Yeah.
it, but then eventually we figured out that now the hack day is really important, but it's better to have in the middle of the week after you've had some discussions and come up with ideas and, here's a thing I want to explore and work on. And everybody's going, yeah, I want to learn about that too. So anyway, by Wednesday, people have had ideas about things that they want to do, and they've met other people who are interested, and that's all kind of settled out. And so basically the day is allocated to working on whatever project you want to explore.
And usually it's software related, but one year Matt Rabel and I made shot skis, so it can be whatever.
Yep, and Julie put together this machine. It was the BevOps. That was it. It was
right,
the BevOps machine, and they had both hardware and software involved. And the hardware was this funky thing that they had put together with whatever lights and actuators and sensors and things that they could. That was hilarious.
Yeah, that was awesome.
So there's all kinds of
It seems like there's always some kind of IoT like device group that wants to go build something physical.
Right. And then in the evening, people do presentations and they explain what they did.
Yeah.
And some of those have been hilarious. Who was the one who I still remember the thing where he had the piece of fabric that had his slides on it that was there not because he had a projector pointing at it, but because he was actually putting he was dynamically replacing what was on this piece of fabric with his slide material. And then when he snapped the fabric, it would move to the next slide.
I don't remember.
It was, oh my gosh. You might have
been there for that one. That's amazing.
Might have missed that one because that was just crazy.
Yeah.
So, and then we have other, it's like, probably this time we won't do a progressive dinner, but we'll do something.
Yeah. And talk about the progressive dinner, because that was an interesting kind of evolution in the typical WinterTech forum.
It was,
or it was even before that. Java Posse Roundup was when we first.
Yes, when we were doing the Java Posse Roundup, there was this. Eventually, people started understanding. Like the afternoon workshops that people would have. I remember the first time somebody came and they said, "We were thinking of doing an afternoon workshop." And they described it and they go, "Would that be okay?" And I go, "Yeah." And they go, "Good, because we were going to do it anyway." And I thought, that's self-organizing conferences for the win.
Yep.
So then Diane Marsh came up with this idea of doing a progressive dinner. And I thought this was the dumbest idea. I'm going, no, this is going to, all these reasons that it's like, no, this isn't a good idea at all. But fortunately, we didn't listen to me, and we tried it, and it was awesome.
Yeah.
And it was like, it was because it was so participatory. It's kind of like your shot ski thing.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, you did this thing that wasn't, it had technology to it, but it wasn't computer technology, but you had a different experience in doing it, and that experience was valid. And it's just like the organization behind a progressive dinner. It's like, well, the houses have to decide what they're going to make, and they get together and they make it, and that's like this good team experience.
Yeah.
And then you have this,
and some people spend all day cooking for us.
They do.
They make it
they make a big deal out of it.
Yeah.
And then you have this. And one of the things that happened was like, well, we have the entire group descending on one house and it's chaos. And it's like, we got to fix this.
We got to partition it.
To break it into groups and things. That was another one of my terrible ideas.
Yeah.
And it did not work at all. And so it's like, because people didn't like it.
They tried to control it. And
yes, every time you and this takes me into, well, what does this say about how we try and manage our companies?
Right. Yeah.
It's like, if every time you try and control something thinking, we got to do that, it's a bad idea. Boy, that's kind of like what companies are all about, is trying to control things.
Yeah. So a little background on the Progressive Dinner. Here in Crested Butte, there's a lot of rental houses.
Yes.
And it's only, the town is 6 blocks by 6 blocks or something. It's a pretty small town. And so we, I don't know, have 5-ish houses at the conference that host a course, and then we just walk from house to house and have a different course. And so
and the courses are not like, I mean, you can try and serve appetizers, but you might, I mean, physically where you're located, it may not make sense to try and, because you got this inertia of this group of people, and they get all spread out, and they get into conversations, and they lose total track of where they're supposed to be. And so you think about that, and you go, okay, we're going to do it in near. It's the what is that?
Traveling sales.
The traveling salesman problem. Yeah. So we solved the traveling salesman problem and just moved the group from one thing to another. But it's okay. You know, you have appetizers. Okay, it's food.
That's right. It's food and
conversation.
The goal is the connection, and that's what happens.
And that's another thing that I think you begin to realize that, okay, there's a few, or maybe just one fundamental principle at play here. And it's like, in this case, it's connection through conversation. Connection through, I think it is. It's connection through conversation. And so when you realize, that's the important thing. It's not about how many people can fit into a house at once. That's not what you want to base your...
It's not what
you don't want to optimize on that. We want to optimize on connection through conversation. Or it's like what we've been discussing about functional programming. What's the essence of that? And I think it's composition. It's composability. And that's really, and everything else is kind of implementation details.
So that's a picture of what's coming up at the Summer Tech Forum Unconference, STFU, and hopefully y'all can come up. It'll be super fun. Okay. And I was, it's always good to hear your kind of journey through arriving at this structure. And maybe there's more evolution to be had there. We'll see.
There's certainly more evolution to be had there.
Let's talk about mentoring, because we just finished having our summer intern, Wyatt, who was working on the effect-oriented programming book with you and Bill and I. And he's a student at CU Boulder. And let's talk about that experience a little bit.
Well, I did an internship program in 2004 or something. And I'd never done one before, and I could have bought a car for what that cost me, because I found housing for them, and they got a stipend, and they got this and that, and then I think I was looking for 2 interns, and I ended up with like 5, because there were several who said, "Oh, you don't have to give me the stipend," and I mean, I already did have the housing, so they could figure out how to fit themselves in, and that, from a productivity standpoint, was not successful enough for me to want to do it again. And fortunately with this, I lowered my expectations down to 0. And I looked at it in terms of, and I think this is part of what you wanted to talk about. It's like, well, when you were in college, did you get summer internships, or did you get any kind of thing, summer jobs or whatever? And in hindsight, you look back and you go, I thought I was a lot more valuable than I actually was. And it was mostly a learning experience for me. But those learning experiences really did contribute a lot to my ultimate value to the world. So I looked at it this way, and I said, I'm just going to look at it that way.
I'm going to say, to kind of give back,
paying back
that you were given,
paying forward the things that those, I now look at them and think, oh yeah, they were like taking a, I don't know if it was a risk, or maybe they knew that they were just going, he'll learn something, and
Yeah.
maybe 1 out of 10 chances they'll want to come back and work for us when they're more educated and able,
Yeah.
if that.
Well, and Wyatt had a wonderful experience. He wrote you a really nice thank you
Mm-hmm.
card and said how much he appreciated and how we helped him learn over the summer, and that he kind of learned some new perspectives on things. Um,
And that he was, it redoubled his, maybe he wasn't sure because he came in as a both half
math.
math, half
Yeah.
computer science major,
Yeah.
and he shifted his major to computer science and a math minor. And who knows, maybe he's already done enough work for the math minor, so it's just a.
Yeah.
But he said, I realized that, yeah, computer science is. I think maybe it was more that it was not just grinding away at programs, although there's a
Yeah.
lot of jobs where that is what it is, but that it can be a lot more. And so
Yeah.
he kind of said, yeah, that reaffirmed my
Yeah.
interest in computer science. So
Yeah, and we certainly, I think, at least I learned a lot from having Wyatt as part of our bookworking sessions, because he brought a different perspective and helped us see things from kind of that beginner's mind in some way, and
mm-hmm.
asked questions that I wasn't thinking about. So it was useful for me, but also I felt fulfillment from having helped him
Yep.
learn as well.
Yep.
And like you said, kind of the paint it back or paint it forward or both.
Mm-hmm.
I've had a lot of mentors in my programming journey, and and I'm incredibly thankful for so many people that have walked with me. And as I've learned, you included, we had that wonderful tweet from Josh, talking about how much it's kind of changed your thinking in Java Book specifically has changed the trajectory of his life, and did for me as well. But then even more personally, just working with you and learning from you, and in all sorts of ways. But then so many other people as well. I'm so thankful that so many people have done this for me, and so it was fun. I don't think I've given back to the level that I've been given, so it was fun with Wyatt to be able to give back a little bit and help people learn. I wish that maybe there is, but I wish there was kind of a better way to find people that want to be mentored or something, because I want to do more of it.
It's complicated here too because finding housing is hard.
Yeah.
So,
And does it have to be in person, or maybe not?
I
I don't
don't
know.
know. Well, and it's also such a great experience up here. I mean, he had a situation all set up.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, having him here was, I think, led to a much fuller
oh
experience.
yeah, yeah. Well, plus you're away from your normal world. You're up here in Crested Butte,
Yeah.
which has got this kind of magical um, sense to it,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah, that certainly
makes
helps.
the whole experience special. But
Yeah.
yeah, could you do it remotely? I mean, Google's Summer of Code thing that's mostly remote, isn't it?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay, and I think it's always been remote.
Yeah.
Yeah, but but I don't know. There are things. There are definitely things that you get by doing stuff in person. So
Connection that
yeah, there is that connection. Although there's a writing program at Western, which is, I don't know, it's like a year-long program, but they have a short window where they bring people up. So it could be something like, what if it was a remote experience and then it ended with like the STFU?
right.
And
Yeah.
so we could bring people up for that period of time, and then they'd have, that would
Yeah.
fill out their experience. Yeah, that's a thought.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that would be
Relate it to STFU or something.
a more feasible thing.
Yeah. Well, let us know on our Discord channel if you have any ideas or thoughts on how we can
Mm-hmm.
all, but me personally, better mentor people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So anyways, it was great to have Wyatt here for the summer.
Yeah, and that was like a balancing experience for my first internship program, where I was, trying to basically manage employees to get them to do things. And
yeah.
I mean, that was a frustrating experience for me. I want employees to manage themselves. In fact, at the beginning, I told Wyatt, I go, I want to be able to forget that, you know, that you're part of this other than when you show up and contribute things. And for the management thing was just like, you keep your hours, you decide when you're going to work and when you're not going to work,
Yeah.
depending on, like, because I can only work for a few hours a day and then my brain gets tired. And I think we're all like that. We have this illusion of an 8-hour day. It's like, that's,
Yeah.
uh,
It's
need to get rid
interesting
of
that
that.
similar with Wyatt, similar to the conference stuff, at your conferences, you at the very beginning set up the structure, make
Mm-hmm.
sure everyone understands law 2 feet and
Mm-hmm.
all the structure that's there, and then you let go of everything. And I think that now with Wyatt, you did the same thing at
Yeah.
the beginning. You said, "Here's the structure. Here's my expectations, which
Mm-hmm.
are none."
Mm-hmm.
And then you were able to let go, and that resulted in a much more enjoyable experience for both you and for Wyatt.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Right. And you can imagine trying, I mean, there's a bunch of other things that have to be figured out, which I think are covered in the book, Reinventing Organizations. But you could imagine setting up an organization that way. And the reason I started studying alternative organization structures is because a number of people at it was still the Java Posse Roundup, started saying, boy, I wish I could work for a company that works like this conference. And that got me thinking, yeah. And since you could say I step away from management, but I try and actually push the management away, try and go, okay, I'm not doing this.
Mm-hmm.
If it's going to get done, it's got to be done by, I don't have the capacity to control this whole conference. And so
Yeah.
I'm not going to.
Yeah.
And that works really well. And it makes you wonder, well, wouldn't it be great to work for a company that worked that way, where people weren't trying to control you all the time?
Yeah. Yeah.
The non-patriarchal workspace.
Yeah. Seems dreamy.
It does seem dreamy, but so did self-organizing conferences.
That's right.
When I first imagined them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
do we have energy to talk about polymorphism?
I think maybe we should save that, because that's a pretty, yeah. I mean, I think this was more of a soft, softer discussion about things. This was more about how do we optimize the experience of people and their interactions, and
yeah.
So I think that's good.
And just to give the background on that, we've been having more learning. We've been learning more about polymorphism,
right?
And so we have some thoughts on that, but we'll save that for next
week. And I mean, we could plant the seed that we can develop later, which is, and I don't remember where I came across this. I'm sure it wasn't my insight, but I came across something. It might have been Runar and Paul's book, very possibly, because I've been slowly going through that for the last, I'm not even sure how long. And anyway, the idea that the essence of polymorphism is a function that can take more than one type of argument, and everything else is implementation details. It's like, how do you do it? So I do think we've got a whole session to go through various
approaches,
flavors, and implementations, but it has changed my way of it, to the point where, like I was telling you this morning, I'm now starting to feel embarrassed about some of the things that I have written in the past. And
we were classically taught that polymorphism was just subtyping. And
subtyping and virtual functions.
Turns out that's not the essence.
No, that isn't. But it's hard to think about it in general.
Yeah.
Like, well, if it's subtyping, what is that? It's like generics. Well, that's different, right? That's just, you're doing something else there. But no, that's a different kind of polymorphism, especially when you think about it through this window of it's a function that can take different types.
So let us know your questions and your thoughts on polymorphism in the Discord channel.
Yes.
And and when we do the episode on that,
Right.
it'll be fun.
Yeah.
Cool. What else? Anything?
There is a conference that I'm going to. I think it's called the Rural Tech Conference. It's not very far from here. It's
over the hill in Marble.
Yeah, it's in Marble, which is
closer to Aspen.
Closer to, yeah, it's like on the way to Carbondale, etc. And I have rented an apartment, which is the largest space you can get. You can also go camp in tents and things like that. But my intent is to, use that apartment.
Nice.
And it's like 3 days. It's Friday evening, Saturday, and Sunday. And I can't remember the dates, but
if you search
I'll probably tweet it at some point.
Cool.
So, and that's a few weeks after the STFU, and the guy who's organizing that is coming to the STFU to kind of see how things, how to do open spaces. So,
nice.
Yeah, so that should be fun.
Cool.
And then we're just.
Oh, and we should mention the workshop.
Yes,
at the beginning of STFU.
Yes, so the workshop is Saturday and Sunday, and we're going to start at 10 and just go for a few hours. We're not going to make it a grueling ordeal, but the thing that we're at least wanting you to be able to come away going, I get what monads are, and we have a chapter in the book that I've been working on with exercises and things. So, and then Bill has been working on actual ZEO examples. So it would be lovely if you could at least say, oh yeah, I know what a monad is, and I see what ZEO is doing, and here's a ZEO example that I understand. He's working on multiple ones. So it's possible we could go further than that, but that's kind of what we're going for. I feel like we're not overreaching, which is often the case when I just watched part of Douglas Crockford's 2012, I think it was quite a while ago, where he introduced the idea of the curse of the monads and then promptly fell into it himself after declaring that, no, I'm going to simplify it. You're going to understand this. I think a big problem was he was using JavaScript. So, it's like once you understand it all, you could go back to JavaScript and go through it. But introducing it with JavaScript was just like insanity in my opinion.
Yeah.
But anyway, we may have fallen into that trap, but I don't think so. I think we may have.
We're going to find out.
We're going to find out
at the workshop before STFU.
If we're using science, the only way to tell is to test something.
That's right.
So we're going to test it on whatever guinea pigs show up for Saturday and Sunday.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, hopefully we'll see everybody there.
Yeah, it would be. I mean, I'm expecting, I think it'll be about a dozen, which is actually a really nice amount.
Yeah.
So, but if anybody else wants to hop in their horse and get up here. You got time. And
one burning question on this. Are we requiring vaccines?
Yes. Yeah, you need to be vaccinated.
Bring your vaccine card.
Yeah, right. Cool.
All right.
This is yet another good session. I feel good about it.
Me too.
All right.
Thanks.